Sonnys Blues. I read about it in the paper, in the subway, on my way to work. I read it, and I couldn't believe it. And I read it again. Then perhaps I just stared at it, at the newsprint spelling out his name, spelling out the story. I stared at it in the swinging lights of the subway car, and in the faces and bodies of the people, and in my own face, trapped in the darkness which roared outside. It was not to be believed. And I kept telling myself that as I walked from the subway station to the high school. And at the same time, I couldn't doubt it. I was scared. Scared for Sonny. He became real to me again. A great block of ice got settled in my belly and kept melting there slowly all day while I taught my classes algebra. It was a special kind of ice. It kept melting, sending trickles of ice water all up and down my veins, but it never got less. Sometimes it hardened and seemed to expand until I felt my guts were going to come spilling out, or that I was going to choke or scream. This would always be at a moment when I was remembering some specific thing Sonny had once said or done. When he was about as old as the boys in my classes, his face had been bright and open. There was a lot of copper in it, and he had wonderfully direct brown eyes and great gentleness and privacy. I wonder what he looked like now. He had been picked up the evening before in a raid on an apartment downtown for peddling and using heroin. I couldn't believe it. But what I meant by that is that I couldn't find any room for it anywhere inside me. I had kept it outside me for a long time. I hadn't wanted to know. I had suspicions, but I didn't name them. I kept putting them away. I told myself that Sonny was wild, but he wasn't crazy. He'd always been a good boy. He had never turned hard or evil or disrespectful the way kids can. So quick, especially in Harlem. I didn't want to believe that I'd ever see my brother going down, coming to nothing, all that light in his face gone out, in the condition I'd already seen so many others. Yet it had happened, and here I was talking about algebra to a lot of boys who might, every one of them, for all I knew, be popping off needles every time they went to the head. Maybe it did more for them than algebra could. I'm sure that the first time Sonny had ever had horse, he could have been much older than these boys were now. These boys now were living as we had been living then. They were growing up with a rush and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibilities. They were filled with rage, and all they really knew were two darknesses. The darkness of their lives, which was now closing in on them, and the darkness of the movies, which had blinded them to that other darkness, and in which they now vindictively dreamed, at once more together than they were at any other time, and more alone. When the last bell rang, the last class ended. I let out my breath. It seemed I'd been holding it for all that time. My clothes were wet. I must have looked as though I'd been sitting in a steam bath, all dressed up all afternoon. I sat alone in the classroom a long time. I listened to the boys outside, downstairs, shouting and cursing and laughing. Their laughter struck me for perhaps the first time. It was not the joyous laughter which, God knows why, one associate with children. It was mocking and insular. Its intent was to denigrate. It was disenchanted, and in this also lay the authority of their curses. Perhaps I was listening to them because I was thinking about my brother, and in them I heard my brother and myself. One boy was whistling a tune, at once very complicated and very simple. It seemed to be pouring out of him as though he were a bird, and it sounded very cool and moving through all that harsh, bright air, only just holding its own through all those other sounds. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked down into the courtyard. It was the beginning of the spring, and the sap was rising in the boys. A teacher passed through them every now and again, quickly, as though he or she couldn't wait to get out of that courtyard, to get those boys out of their sights and off their minds. I started collecting my stuff. I thought I'd better get home and talk to Isabel. The courtyard was almost deserted by the time I got downstairs. I saw this boy standing in the shadow of a doorway looking just like Sonny. I almost called his name. Then I saw that it wasn't Sonny, but somebody we used to know, a boy from around our block. He had been Sonny's friend. He'd never been mine, having been too young for me, and anyway, I'd never liked him. And now, even though he was a grown-up man, he still hung around that block, still spent hours on the street corners, was always high and raggy. I used to run into him from time to time, and he'd often work around asking me for a quarter or 50 cents. He always had some real good excuse, too, and I always gave it to him. I don't know why. But now, abruptly, I hated him. I couldn't stand the way he looked at me, partly like a dog, partly like a cunning child. I wanted to ask him what the hell was he doing in the school courtyard. He sort of shuffled over to me and said, "I see you got the papers. So you already know about it." "You mean about Sonny?" "Yes, I already know about it. How come they didn't get you?" He grinned. It made him repulsive. And it also brought to mind what he looked like as a kid. "I wasn't there. I stay away from them people." "Good for you." I offered him a cigarette and I watched him through the smoke. "You come all this way down here just to tell me about Sonny?" "That's right." He was sort of shaking his head and his eyes looked strange, as though they were about to cross. The bright sun deadened his damp, dark brown skin, and it made his eyes look yellow and showed up the dirt in his kinked hair. He smelled funky. I moved a little away from him and I said, "Well, thanks, but I already know about it and I gotta get home." "I'll walk you a little ways," he said. We started walking. There were a couple of lads still loitering in the courtyard, and one of them said goodnight to me and looked strangely at the boy beside me. "What you gonna do?" he asked. "Me?" "I mean, about Sonny." "Look, I haven't seen Sonny for over a year. I'm not sure I'm going to do anything. Anyway, what the hell can I do?" "That's right," he said quickly. "Ain't nothing you can do. Can't much help old Sonny no more, I guess." It was what I was thinking, so it seemed to me he had no right to say it. "I'm surprised at Sonny, though," he went on. He had a funny way of talking. He looked straight ahead, as though he were talking to himself. "I thought Sonny was a smart boy. I thought he was too smart to get hung." "I guess he thought so too," I said sharply, "and that's how he got hung. And how about you? You're pretty goddamn smart, I bet." Then he looked directly at me, just for a minute. "I ain't smart," he said. "If I was smart, I'd have reached for a pistol a long time ago." "Look, don't tell me your sad story. If it was up to me, I'd give you one." Then I felt guilty. Guilty, probably, for never having supposed that that poor bastard had a story of his own, much less a sad one. And I asked him quickly, "What's going to happen to him now?" He didn't answer this. He was off by himself someplace. "Funny thing," he said, and from the tone, we might have been discussing the quickest way to get to Brooklyn. "When I saw the papers this morning, the first thing I asked myself was if I had anything to do with it. I felt sort of responsible." I began to listen more carefully. The subway station was on the corner, just before us. I stopped. He stopped too. We were in front of a bar, and he ducked slightly, peering in, but whoever he was looking for didn't seem to be there. The jukebox was blasting away with something black and bouncy, and I half watched the barmaid as she danced her way from the jukebox to her place behind the bar. And I watched her face as she laughingly responded to something someone said to her, still keeping time to the music. She smiled, One saw the little girl. One sensed the doomed, still struggling woman beneath the battered face of the Sonny floor.
I never give Sonny nothing,
The boy said finally.
but a long time ago, I come to school high, and Sonny asked me how it felt.
He paused. I couldn't bear to watch him. I watched the barmaid, and I listened to the music which seemed to be causing the pavement to shake.
I told him it felt great.
The music stopped. The barmaid paused and watched the jukebox until the music began again. It did. All this was carrying me to some place I didn't want to go. I certainly didn't want to know how it felt. It felt everything. The people, the houses, the music, the dark quicksilver barmaid with menace. And this menace was their reality. What's going to happen to him now? I asked again.
They'll send him away someplace, and they'll try to cure him.
He shook his head.
Maybe he'll even think he's kicked the habit. Then they'll let him loose.
He gestured, throwing his cigarette into the gutter.
That's all.
What do you mean, that's all? But I knew what he meant.
I mean, that's all.
He turned his head and looked at me, pulling down the corners of his mouth.
Don't you know what I mean?
He asked softly.
How the hell would I know what you mean?
I almost whispered it. I don't know why.
That's right,
He said to the air.
how would he know what I mean?
He turned toward me again, patient and calm. And yet, I somehow felt him shaking as though he were going to fall apart. I felt that ice in my guts again, the dread I felt all afternoon. And again I watched the barmaid moving about the bar, washing glasses and singing,
Listen, they'll let him out, and then he'll just start all over again. That's what I mean.
You mean they'll let him out? Then he'll just start working his way back in again? You mean he'll never kick the habit? Is that what you mean?
That's right.
He said cheerfully.
You see what I mean?
Tell me, I said at last. Why does he want to die? He must want to die. He's killing himself. Why does he want to die? He looked at me in surprise. He licked his lips.
He don't want to die. He wants to live. Don't nobody want to die, ever.
Then I wanted to ask him too many things he could not have answered. Or if he had, I could have not borne the answers. I started walking. Well, I guess it's none of my business,
It's going to be rough on old Sonny.
he said. We reached the subway station. This is your station? He asked. I nodded. I took one step down.
Damn,
He said suddenly, and I looked up at him. He grinned again.
Damn if I didn't leave all my money at home. You ain't got $1 on you, have you? Just for a couple days is all.
All at once, something inside me gave and threatened to come pouring out of me. I didn't hate him anymore. I felt that in another moment I'd start crying like a child. Sure, I said, don't sweat. I looked in my wallet, didn't have $1. I only had a 5. Here, I said. That'll hold you? He didn't look back. He didn't want to look at it. A terrible closed look came over his face, as though he were keeping the number on the bill a secret from him and me.
Thanks.
He said, and now he was dying to see me go.
Don't worry about Sonny. Maybe I'll write him or something.
Sure, I said, you do that. So long,
Be seeing you.
he said. I went on down the steps.